There's few things Jehovah's Witnesses are more proud of than their worldwide preaching work.
It is a message heard in more than 210 lands.
Guten Morgen.
Guten Morgen.
And so now that the preaching work has peaked and is going on its downslide, I thought it would be fun to look back and see how well they did. Now, some folks watching may protest that, what? It didn't peak, did it? And yep, it did. It's safe to say there will never be more hours reported than there were on the 2019 report, when witnesses spent almost 2.1 billion hours preaching the good news that year. With the doctrinal change announced in 2023 that publishers no longer need to report service time, realistically that figure will never be surpassed. But this wasn't a switch that just flipped suddenly in 2023. Back in the 80s and 90s, basically after 1975 came and went without Armageddon happening, there's been a gradual trend in the religion to view service to the religion not solely in terms of how many doors you're knocking, but also time spent doing quick builds, for example, and international construction and going to Bethel. The leadership has emphasized this more holistic view of how witnesses can spend their time serving the organization, especially after 1990 when the cash flow from selling literature to members dried up. But it is true that the thing Jehovah's Witnesses are probably most proud of is how they're preaching in all corners of the earth.
We are pleased to be united with you in the grand fulfillment of Jesus' words at Acts chapter 1 verse 8. You will be witnesses of me to the most distant part of the earth.
The May 2024 Watchtower said, "Consider what Jesus said about the scope of our preaching work. He foretold that the good news would be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations. That prophecy is being fulfilled today as never before. The kingdom message is published in more than 1,000 languages, and by means of the jw.org website, it is available to the majority of the world's population."
Well, why don't you come on in? I'll get some beers and we can talk about this good news.
But although they often like to bring up proudly how many languages they translate literature into, it's more than that. The global preaching work is used as an identifying mark to prove that Jehovah's Witnesses must be the one true religion because they're the ones fulfilling Matthew 24:14 like no other religion ever has.
It is all part of the greatest preaching campaign the world has ever known.
Of course, it's true that the point isn't just tagging each country like a Carmen Sandiego situation.
Where in the world is
Carmen Sandiego?
If that's all it was, witnesses had that wrapped up by probably about 1920, as did almost any other Christian religion that sent out missionaries. No, the main point obviously is to actually preach to everyone in those countries so they have the opportunity to join the winning side and become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And in that respect, the preaching work of Jehovah's Witnesses has proven to be just a spectacular failure. And we can prove that, oddly enough, simply by using the data they themselves publish each year in the service report. If we look at the most recent report released, the 2023 one, it lists 206 lands where Jehovah's Witnesses are actively preaching. Now, if we add up the first column there, the population of each country, those lands have a combined population of 5.7 billion. If we look at the total world population in 2023, it was right around 8 billion. So subtracting the 5.7 billion, that leaves 2.3 billion, just a bit under a third of the world's population. Now, the report lumps this chunk of the population under one final line there, 33 other lands. These are the countries where Jehovah's Witnesses are banned, and it tells us there was about 208,000 publishers in these countries. Now, one of those countries is Russia. Before 2017, Russia was listed out separately, but since then, they've been included with the banned countries. In the 2017 yearbook, the Watchtower Society reported there were 170,000 average publishers in Russia. So, if we remove those 170,000 Russian publishers from the total of 208,000, we're left with 38,000 publishers to cover the other 32 lands. So what countries are included in this group? Well, we can see the countries in an infographic that was included in a 2020 report from the U.S. government agency, the Commission on International Religious Freedom. The elephant in the room is obviously China, with a population of 1.4 billion people. So, since we know roughly how many witnesses are in Russia, what happens if we subtract Russia's population, 144 million, from the 2.3 billion total population that reside in banned countries? Well, we're left with about 2.2 billion people, and 38,000 publishers to preach to all of those. That's a publisher to population ratio of 1 to 58,000. So as an example, in my metro area, there's about 500,000 people living there. That 1 to 58,000 ratio would essentially be like 13 publishers being assigned to cover my entire city. Definitely kind of a Mission Impossible situation. Oh, and also we have to consider population growth. Even if we use the U.S.'s relatively low 0.5% population growth rate, that means the city's population in our example is growing by 2,500 every year. So not only do those 13 publishers have to try to accomplish this impossible task of contacting everyone on this list of 500,000 people, it's like every year another 25 congregations worth of people move in, and all of them also need to be preached to. In effect, every year that Armageddon doesn't arrive, witnesses fall further and further behind their stated goal of preaching the good news to everyone. Another point is, it's not just banned countries where witnesses are almost non-existent. There's some countries where witnesses are legal and they still have similarly enormous publisher-to-population ratios. For example, Bangladesh has a population of 173 million, so basically half the U.S. population, and they have just 340 publishers to cover that. Not 340,000, 340. Pakistan, with a population of 234 million, or about 70% of the U.S. population, has just 1,200 publishers covering the entire country. India, which matches China with a population of 1.4 billion, so 4 times the U.S. population, has only 57,000 publishers, just 1/20th of what the U.S. has. So this is the main point. After 140 years and countless billions of hours of preaching, there's still roughly a full third of the Earth's population that is completely uncontacted by Jehovah's Witnesses. There's basically zero chance that these billions of people in China, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh will ever encounter a witness preaching. And remember that the world's population growth rate is roughly 1%. So in addition to being unable to preach to everyone that's already alive, roughly 140 million new people are born every year. It kind of reminds me of that joke where the guy says coyotes keep eating his outdoor cats, and his neighbor asks how many cats he has, and the guy says, well, he just goes to the shelter and gets a new cat if one gets eaten, and the neighbor says, well, that just sounds like you're feeding shelter cats to coyotes. Witnesses have always framed the inexplicable non-arrival of Armageddon as a sign of God's mercy, that what it is he's giving people time to convert because he doesn't want anyone to be destroyed. But what's the actual situation when we do the math?
You heard right. Do the math.
Well, each year that Armageddon doesn't arrive, roughly 300,000 people get baptized. So that's cool, I guess. But the trouble is also every year another 140 million people are born. So every year that Armageddon doesn't come, that's 139 million more people who will die at Armageddon. God's patience is essentially just a method of increasing the body count at Armageddon with a couple extra steps. So since Jehovah's Witnesses teach that the end is ostensibly just weeks or months away,
the final part of the last days,
you might think they're desperately trying to increase their preaching activity in these places like Bangladesh, that they'd be having a segment on every episode of JW Broadcasting that teaches witnesses Bengali, that they're setting up centers in Bangladesh for witnesses from around the world to come preach there for a week or a month at a time, that they would actively be encouraging American and European witnesses to stop donating toward the proposed Ramapo movie studios and instead use their money to move to Pakistan or India and preach full-time there until their money runs out. But no, not a single one of those things is happening. In the 10 years of JW Broadcasting, there has been exactly one single 2-minute segment that mentions Bangladesh, and all it said is there's some neat animals there and some nice people.
Bangladesh is also home to jackfruit.
The religion of Jehovah's Witnesses is, I think, very aware on some level of this paradox that, despite claiming their main mission is to contact everyone on earth with the good news, that that's basically the whole reason they exist as an organization in the last days, that the fact is they're actually doing a pretty terrible job at it. In that May 2024 Watchtower, they illustrate the many people they realistically are never going to reach with the good news. I especially like that line in paragraph 7. Millions of people today live in areas where the preaching work is severely restricted. As we now know, it should have read billions of people live in those areas. Just a bit of understatement. So what happens to those billions of people who have never even met a witness when Armageddon comes? And the answer from the religion is basically, oh. The article says, we must acknowledge that Jehovah has not yet revealed to us what he will do in answer to this question. So, just don't worry about it. It'll all work out somehow. Of course, the trouble with saying it doesn't really matter whether someone was reached with the good news or not because it'll all work out in the end is that then raises the question of, well, why does anyone need to preach at all then? It's like that joke where the man in a remote tribe is talking to the missionary who's trying to convert him, and he asks the missionary, if I didn't know about God and sin, would I go to hell? And the missionary says, no, not if you didn't know. And the man asks, then why did you tell me? There's literally only downsides to witnesses preaching to others. Imagine if all those billions of hours were spent running hospitals or soup kitchens or doing literally anything else. As we mentioned, at some level, the organization knows this. The preaching work is slowly dying by 1,000 cuts delivered by the governing body. They've eliminated the requirements for publishers to turn in time. They've cut pioneer hour requirements in half from what it used to be. The Gilead Missionary School no longer trains people to be missionaries. I think there will probably always be witnesses preaching in public in some form, but it's safe to say peak preaching probably happened at least 5 years ago. Before COVID, before all these policy changes were rolled out. Now we're on the downward slide. The number of reported hours will never be higher than what they've been in the past. Ironically, in a very war is peace kind of way, the article ends by saying,
these clarifications actually make our preaching work more urgent than ever.
Man, talk about mixed messages. I'd say this is one of the most confusing doctrinal changes introduced by the religion in terms of witnesses not knowing how they're supposed to feel about the preaching work anymore. The words on the page say it is very important, but the unspoken message of all the new policies is it's no longer very important at all. So yeah, that's about it. I just thought it was fun to see how even if we only use the society's own numbers that it releases, it still shows the level of failure by the religion to actually fulfill Matthew 24:14, that a third of the Earth's population still hasn't been reached by the good news. I guess they can tick a box that, yep, there's probably at least one witness somewhere in every country on Earth, so that's something I suppose. Including North Korea, though? I'm still not sure on that one. Okay, well, that wraps this up. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to for more videos, and we'll catch you all in the next one. Take care now.